Hello, container fans. My name is Bret, and this is my show. I'm here every Thursday, live, sometimes with a guest, sometimes just answering your Q&A in chat. Sometimes we go for an hour, sometimes we go a lot longer, depending on how many questions you ask. So you can always reach me here on Thursdays. And this week, I'm pretty excited about our guest. But first up, let me give you a couple of tips. You want to get your questions in early so that we can get to your stuff early in the process. Sometimes we get dozens of questions and it takes us a while to get through them. So this week we're focused on Kubernetes troubleshooting, and we're going to go through a new tool I want you to check out. And then you can watch this show later. It eventually will be a podcast once I get the podcast back up and running. Sorry on that. But thanks to all of you that are sponsoring me on Patreon. So over at Patreon, you can see you got a way to check out all the new things I'm creating. And you can actually scroll down to the follow button there and click that. Then you can see just the things that I'm releasing. So new shows, new open source products, new courses, course updates, all that stuff. And thank you to those of you that are giving me a coffee every month, essentially, and buying one of the membership levels. So you get exclusive access to Discord server, which you can see that right above me. The DevOps fan, that right there is our Discord server for all DevOps chat all day long. We have a lot of fun in there, and people are always teaching me something new. So there's a lot to talk about in there. You can do that for free. And thank you for those that are patrons on my Patreon channel. You sponsor this show. I appreciate it. All right. So this week I'm excited because we're going to be talking about one of the difficult topics with Kubernetes, which is troubleshooting, meaning that things aren't going well. Welcome to the show, Itiel Shwartz. He's the CTO and the co-founder of a little startup called Komodor. And I just recently learned about this, so I was checking it out, and it's got some pretty cool stuff. So I'm excited to get into it and learn something about it. And welcome to the show.
Yeah, hey, pleasure to be here, Brett.
Yeah. So we were talking before the show. You've got a lot of background in not just making a startup, but obviously Kubernetes and the world of running containers in production. And tell me a little bit about your background. Let's start with that. Like, how did this even come about?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give a quick introduction about me and about Komodor. So Komodor was founded by me and my partner, Ben O'Fleary. We met in the university 10 years ago, something like that. Ben, after the university or during the university, started working for Google, and he worked there both as a software engineer and then a product manager. So he worked with Borg, not really Kubernetes, but the very similar concepts. And I, on the other hand, started working for eBay, which I was a backend engineer and an infrastructure engineer back then. Then I joined an Israeli startup named Forter. I was there again, backend and infrastructure engineer. And then I was the first developer in Rookout, which is another Israeli startup. Super cool. I was there the first developer. So basically, I have built everything from the ground up. And a lot of my experience is from building and playing with Kubernetes when it was a little bit younger and more rough, around the edges. And we started Komodor almost a year ago. We are now 13 people. And we try to help companies basically troubleshoot and debug things in Kubernetes easier. Because I know from firsthand that troubleshooting an issue, even or especially when you are on Kubernetes, might be super difficult sometimes.
For sure. And I'm sure you have tons of stories about customers that are already trying it out and how it's helping them and all that. That's there's a ton of stuff to talk about in troubleshooting. And one of the challenges I think for a lot of us is if you come from a developer world, you're only learning about infrastructure, or you tend to only learn about infrastructure when something breaks and you're the only one to fix it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, or maybe an operator person like myself, I come from that traditional background, and we from day one, we usually know, okay, I have to know how this system works because I have to be able to fix it. That's my job. Sometimes developers are just kind of thrown at it. They don't really have all the training and certifications around servers and networking and all those things. So
yeah. So I'll share a little bit about the philosophy or how I see the world. So basically, like there is Kubernetes, which is great, and there are a lot of tools like helping people develop faster to Kubernetes, and we can see like the rise of like the shift left movement and bringing more power to the devs. And I'm all for like helping developers be more productive and take more ownership over their code and over like the production. But what we usually see in a lot of the companies and a lot of our customers is that from one hand, like the developers can now deploy to production very easily, like almost alone without the need of the DevOps or the operation person involved in the issue. But on the other hand, like they have built like a very good tooling for allowing developers to deploy to production faster. It might be GitOps or like like all of the abstraction above Kubernetes. They make it super easy like to deploy a new container or a new service, like 5 minutes, and you do like the Kubernetes hello world, and you have a production service up and running. But what we see that like has a lot less focus is like the day two operation, or okay, now my service is broken. How do I fix it? Like, what's an ingress? What's a load balancer? Like, all of the in most companies, like the developers don't really know or understand how does Kubernetes work. When I update the ingress object, what just happened here? And it's all like a voodoo. And like the ops people, a lot of the times are telling them, yeah, you don't really need to know that. Like, yeah, I got it covered. Just follow like A, B, and C. And then something break. It's the middle of the night, or it might be even like the middle of the day, and the developer all of a sudden needs to understand that like there's a thing like namespace, ingress, load balancer. There's a pod there running. Like it's not a super like magical server, but there are actually like real things happening there. And what we see in a lot of the companies we're talking with or our customers is like the ops team are trying to empower the developers. Their goal is basically to make themselves almost obsolete, like the ops people, so they can like focus on building more tools for the rest of the team. And in order to do so, they need to give power to the developers, not only to release faster to production, because everyone is speaking about like fastest, like fast CI/CD, but also, okay, now things break. What do I do?
Right. And I mean, that's one of the first experiences that someone's going to have when they're learning Kubernetes, for example, is like, you do a kube control apply, or maybe you're doing a run or create command, but you do that kube control apply, and no matter what, as long as the YAML is correct in its formatting, it will return you're done. And and it's asynchronous, and yet it has nothing to do with whether your app actually works. That command, like a Docker run, typically will error out if the image doesn't exist or if your application is crashing. Like a Docker run is very simple that way. But when we all jump to that Kubernetes declarative asynchronous model, it completely starts to break down the whole, how do I even know what's working and what isn't? And there's not really like there's not a single status command that gives you a status of all the things in your application like a Docker Compose might do. So yeah, it's super tricky, I think, up front. Obviously, Kubernetes is getting better. I mean, we talk a lot about Kubernetes on this show, and one of the things I want to talk to you about is like, we're now finally getting ephemeral containers with the debug command. Like some of these new things are showing up that'll let us, maybe more advanced people in this case, but let us at least see something from the command line. But I do get a lot of questions around, validating installations, validating that things are working, troubleshooting things that are not working, what's the right commands, are there tools I should use? Like these are just all the sorts of stuff we have on the show. So those of you in chat, it's your job. If you have a question about any of that stuff, let's talk about it. It doesn't have to be just about Komodor.
It's a real issue. It's a real pain, because like Helm, like in Helm 3, they added like an atomic command, like atomic flag, if I'm not mistaken, in order exactly to solve those issues. Because like in Helm 1, so you deployed something with Helm and you don't even know the formatting is wrong, and you find out only when you do like kubectl get pods or something like that, or a Helm ls, and then you find out what's the issue. I think what of the things that is especially missing, and you said it correctly, is I'm going to the kubectl apply, and something will happen. how will I know 10 seconds from now that my application is running? Do I trust my CI/CD pipeline maybe that will double check me? Or like what some customers are telling us, that every time they are doing a deploy, what they're doing is like opening like 4 different tabs and looking at maybe at the Grafana metrics, and doing like kubectl watch for one side and the Jenkins job on like the third screen, like the third tab, and they're toggling between all of them just to hope like everything will work. And they're like, yeah, we are doing like this every time we're deploying. And like Komodor really tries to help exactly like to address those issues. And to be frank, like at start, we didn't have like a deploy tracking mechanism, because we guessed that, I don't know, like people are deploying and they already know how to validate if that deployment is working or not. And we talked with one of our customers, and he said it would be super cool if you can notify me every time a deployment fail. And we were a little bit surprised. We asked him, like, how do you currently know that things fail? Like, I guess things sometimes fail for you. And he told us that he used Datadog, which is a great tool. And that after like 10 minutes of failed deploy, Datadog will alert, like they have general availability alerts. So he told me every time a deployment fail, it takes me like 10 minutes in order like to get to the Datadog threshold. And then I will get some sort of alert. And after like I get the Datadog alert, I understand that there is a problem and I'm trying to figure out what was deployed. And then I understand it like this way. And so I think like no matter like if you're using Komodor or not, like making sure that after a deploy, it might be manually, it might be like automatically, that your application is up and running. And it sounds like very, I don't know, like maybe very basic to some people, but I think that for other people, again, like I don't want to point blames, but a lot of the time for the developer, who people just told him like, follow this template and you'll be golden. So just ask yourself like, okay, the pipeline will work, everything will be green. Does it mean my application is really up and running now and I don't have like crash loop back off or something like that happening like 1 minute after the deploy?
Yeah, and it's and there's lots of things. I mean, because there's no app that's just, well, there's not no app, but there's very few apps that are one pod in one deployment and nothing else, right? So that's the simplest apps that we all probably have to deal with on a daily basis are probably dozens of containers and multiple services, probably multiple public ports through a load balancer or something. And any one of those things, the funny thing is like Kubernetes is doing all this stuff in the background, but in order to actually get a sense of what just your app, assuming your app's not the only one on the cluster, even if you tried to do it in kube control commands, you would need a bunch of different terminals open with various, describe with watch, events with watch. Like you would need all these different commands, these get commands to see, okay, cool, my pods are launching. Okay, my pods are not crash loop back off. The image name was correct. Okay, it's down, it's pulled the image. Like there's so much of this, oh yeah, now my service has all the entry points that it needs to talk to the pod, so the service must be working. Okay, can the load balancer, are the health checks working? Like there's so much of this that you basically have to end up being a command line guru, or hope that there's like a magical tool that you can just show you a screen.
Like
that you just look at that one screen.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, let's be honest, how does things really work like in most companies that we see? Like most people aren't a command line guru, right? Like most people aren't like the best Kubernetes troubleshoot. But what usually happens, there is one guy in the company, or maybe 2 or 3 guys or girls in the company, and he knows his way around Kubernetes. He knows how to do like the pipe, and do like a magical command that show him everything. So this guy or girl, she's bombarded with like questions on, is my pods okay? Why aren't they okay? What just happened now? What happened 5 minutes ago? And so like the most common tool in order like to use to troubleshoot Kubernetes at the moment is basically Slack, or maybe Zoom now with all of the with the COVID
like with notifications and stuff.
And no, it's like asking other people, the guru guy, what just happened now? Like what just happened and why? And can you please fix it?
Yeah, I was going to say here, like while we're talking about it, I wouldn't say that I live in Kubernetes all day every day, but it's rare that a day goes by that I'm not doing something, and I still live with this cheat sheet up from the documentation because I'm always like, there's so many examples in here of advanced commands or piping commands or, oh, what's that option? And sure, I could use the help of the command line. I could do all those things, but there's so many things here, and you can just, search the web page for, what's the watch options that I have, or I didn't spell it right, but anyway, so yeah, that is, even as a person who's dealing with from Docker's documentation, because this stuff is hard, and
it's so many flags and moving pieces, and then you write like the wrong order or something like that, and you just can figure out why you can't get the deployment as a YAML or something like that. Like, and I'm also very strong on Kubernetes, like for 4 or 5 last years. And I also I use Komodor most of the time, but every now and then I do use like kubectl, like cheat sheet, and the terminal history, basically, like reverse search. And what was the magical command I was just using like a week ago in order to troubleshoot something very similar to that one.
Yeah, I mean, all the command line tricks. But we've got. So what started happening, and we're gonna segment into talking more about what your product does here in a second. But so a lot of us, we start this journey of, okay, so we've learned this command line, and so like a lot of my students will say, okay, I now have installed the Kubernetes dashboard, right? The one that's like the official one, and it tells me some things, and it does update. It may not highlight immediate problems or immediate activities necessarily right away, but it's getting a little better. And then then people learn about things like Lens or Infra, which are desktop applications that allow you to look at different clusters. And those are kind of general purpose tools that, you can use them to apply Kubernetes manifest. You can use them to just list things in a visual way. They might have some basic graphs. They try to highlight if pods are, if there's a pod error state, they might do some basic stuff like that. But they're not necessarily like what's going on right now, like focusing on live and troubleshooting, right? Like what is changing, what events are happening in my cluster. So then, like, at least for me, my journey started with like, okay, let me go see if I can find the things that are focused more on that, so that I have a tool specifically for when I deliberately want to make changes and I want to see what's happening in real time. And how do I know that those things actually did what I expect them to do, without going to, like you said, like waiting for the monitoring tools to catch up, that are maybe a little bit more, 5-minute average stats, a little bit, because Datadog's great. I love Datadog. It's a great example. It's complicated, but for a product that you can one line install, it's hard to beat it. So is that how you came to this journey of, like, you had so many problems and you're like, what if there was a better tool, and you decided to create it yourself? Is that how this started?
Yeah, like exactly that. And I will say that like the main drive, like that made Komodor, is to try to answer like the first question that I asked myself every time I had like troubleshooting, or I think most of the people, and that is, what the hell just changed right now? Because most incidents, believe it or not, are originated from changes. So someone who changed something somewhere in the cluster, maybe in a different cluster, but something just changed, and now you try to figure out what happened and where should I look at and who should I talk with. And to answer this question, like today, you need to open up like 5 different tools and to track and being like a detective. But you're like a very, very sad detective, because you don't have a lot of clues, and you need to be really like expert in order to use the tools that you already have. Like, again, Datadog, great tool. You need a lot of context. Even Lens, if I'm going to tell you that there is an issue in a specific like pod or something like that, it's not that easy to use, like for people who don't really understand the context. And a lot of the times, the problem doesn't really lie on your service. It might be someone else who just deploy a version, and you are relying on a certain API or something else. And basically, we try to understand, to help you like figure out what changed that might like explain what you're experiencing, because a customer in your site can't be able to log in, and you didn't really deploy it like 5 minutes ago, but for some reason, like, what do I do now? I open Lens and everything looks good other than maybe one pod who is on LT. But why? So like, to answer this question, the why part, Komodor was born. And specific, like we are like Kubernetes native. And the reason is that because Kubernetes, it's so easy to deploy new application, then people are just doing like everything is a microservice. It's super easy. And then not only that, you don't really understand your application, like how do I troubleshoot like a single pod application, but now you are inside the company and there are other teams and they're also deploying changes and they are also not that good in troubleshooting. And everything is just much harder. So this was like the main reason. There is like, I'm not sure like if you have it, like how do I troubleshoot a failed deployment in Kubernetes? Do you know like the flowchart?
I think I've seen some serious ones, and then I've seen some ones that look like a joke because it's, I mean, if you get them complicated enough, it's like, okay, this decision tree is insane. But but yeah, in fact, there's no way actually for you to share a URL with me. I just realized.
No, I can do like a screen sharing.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. No, you can, but you can't. I just realized we don't have a chat so that you can like send me a link to put in the chat.
The link?
Yeah, but anyway, just show your screen. Share your screen. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I'm going to do a screen share. It's not like our product, but it's a very nice example of what does it really mean to troubleshoot Kubernetes. Let's see if it works. So this is like a real example from the Learn Kubernetes. And this is how do I troubleshoot? It's not even how do I troubleshoot like Kubernetes, but only like failed deployment. Can you guys see?
Yes,
now?
yeah.
So like this
it's a lot.
You have code. And by the way, sometimes like in here, you ended up like in here, like unknown state. And what is just happening right now? Like unknown state, what should I do now? So Komodor tries to take like most of this flowchart and basically gives you a very easy to use tool, not knowing like following all of the different, like steps. In order to understand what the hell is just happened, what just happened in my cluster. So yeah, this is like, again, not our product. Like we try to make it easy as possible, but this flowchart is like the canonical, like how do I troubleshoot Kubernetes the failed deployments. So yeah, maybe I will show like a little bit about Komodor right now.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump in. Let's dig in because people already have questions. I've got some questions stacking up here, and I'm sure we'll get more as we start sort of playing around and seeing what we have there. But while you're setting up and sharing your screen there, I'm going to answer a couple of chat questions. One of them that just came in from That Onion on Twitch. Hello. They're talking more about so people start asking about like resource limitations and some of that stuff and how that works. And so someone That Onion asked around resource limitation, rescheduling the container once the limit is hit. Is there a native way to set soft limits so that container would not see all the host memory instead? But yes, setting memory limits inside the container runtime should be the solution. So yes, Kubernetes and Docker do have both reservations and limits. You can set both. And that uses a feature underneath the inside the Linux operating system that uses C groups to actually control that stuff. One of the problems, though, is that if you have an application that is not paying attention to the C group limitations of the container, a great example is an older Java application. Older Java apps before, like, I don't know, a year or two ago, Java didn't respect the C groups. So you might set limits, but Java would say, I see that the whole server has 64 gig, even though you gave me 3 gig. I want to use all 64 gig. and then Java would basically, if it was given the limits, the job of Kubernetes and Docker are to wait for those limits to be overrun, essentially, and then kill it. It's basically Linux. Linux will do an out of memory error and will kill the application. So you could basically DOS yourself if you didn't have your apps. Now, this is app specific, so you've got to kind of dive in your app and learn about how does your app deal with C group limitations in Linux. It gets a little nerdy, but for a lot of apps, hopefully you can just set limits and the app will respect them if you set them in Kubernetes and Docker. Some older apps or maybe outdated stuff like Java, if you have an older one, you might have to actually set it in Java's configuration. Anyway, that was a great question.
XMX and so on.
Yeah, there you go. You already know it. You know it by heart.
Yeah,
yeah, when you run Java at the command in your Docker file, you'll need to set that in there, or you can override it in your Kubernetes manifest. But yeah, it's an option at the command line for Java, and most people don't notice, right? Like it just runs, but then when they set the limits, the thing keeps crashing. Why does it keep crashing?
I didn't do like Java troubleshooting for a long time, to be honest. Like we are Python and Golang and TypeScript, TypeScript. So no Java for me for a lot of time. But yeah, like setting the right limits on the Java is super important when you use Docker. And it's nice to know that they change it, because when I last time I wrote Java, it still didn't really respect like the outer limits.
Yeah. Okay, the next question I have for you before we get into it, and maybe you can say you're going to answer this as a part of the demo, the difference between monitoring tools like ELK, Prometheus versus Komodor. So like,
yeah, sure.
So
what's
the
Prometheus, Datadog, New Relic, Splunk, all of them, they are great tools. Like, to be honest, we use like Logs.io, which is like an Israeli Kibana style platform, and we use Datadog. So those tools are really good in telling you like the symptoms. They tell you that you have a problem. For example, Datadog or Prometheus will shout at you like your CPU is high, or your latency is high, or your number of services is currently low, like beneath some sort of threshold. So they are great in what we call like the symptoms, and they tell you that there is a problem and you should look. But now let's say that your Prometheus is shouting at you that the CPU is high. 5 minutes ago, everything looked great. You look at the graph and everything was, amazing. But now things are really bad. So Prometheus doesn't really help you to understand what just happened that might explain it. It might be that you release a new application and you have a bug. Maybe some other team that you are dependent on just changed something. Maybe some customer, maybe someone in your team opened the feature flag that you shouldn't have. So a lot of different things might explain the same symptom, which is like high CPU, high latency, a high error rate. So what Komodor does, we don't really focus on the metric tracking or even logging tracking. Use Splunk, use Grafana. It's great tools. We integrate with those tools and we show you on a single timeline both the alerts from those systems, but also all of the changes that happen across the system. And those changes might be from your team, and it might be something externally. So we are not competing, and we are a good friend. And in the short demo, you're going to witness we have like Sentry exceptions, Datadog exceptions, Kubernetes health issues. So all of these are based on like the real issues our customers are facing, and sometimes even we are facing issues. And like I said, we are using those tools internally.
Right. Yeah. So it's adding to your toolkit, not necessarily replacing your existing.
Yeah. Exactly. We play nicely with
a lot of monitoring
tools.
Oh, sorry. Go.
No. We play nice with other tools. Like we don't come to replace them. We come to take all of the data from them and to help you to get more context regarding issues and regarding problems.
Well, and one of the challenges too with a lot of logging and metrics tools is they come relatively unopinionated. So they, what I mean, I haven't seen all of your app yet, but I'm gonna just say that I like opinionated tools that have a focus. In a lot of cases, you could actually argue that Docker is a very opinionated tool, and that's one of the things that had its success was that we knew how to run containers before, but it was really complicated, and you had to figure it all out. And there was a lot of only like Netflixes and Googles could do all that. But Docker made it a one-line opinion that worked for most people. And one of the things I love are tools that do have that kind of a experience-based opinion of how things ought to work. And I'm excited to see it. So let's show it off.
Let's see it. I'm going to show it off, and I will say that what you just described is one of the questions that we keep on asking in ourselves, and that is basically, we have ton of data and we share to our users only a small amount of it, and we try to share like the data that really means something for them, and not
Right.
throw everything we know just happen inside your Kubernetes cluster. So I'll give like a high level overview of how we see the world at the moment, and this is like a simple example of what I just said. And you have like the alert production channel, and the PagerDuty just notified you that there is an issue. You go to Datadog and you see the CPU is high. Maybe you do kubectl describe or kubectl get status or something like that to understand what changed and what's the current status of your pods. Then you go to Jenkins because you search like for the last change that happened, and from the Jenkins you usually go to the GitHub to see what code changed and who changed it. And you ended up going to Slack and basically asking people who changed what, why, and when, and because does this explain like the high latency or high CPU I'm experiencing. So this is how like Komodor this is the world prior to Komodor. And now let me do like a screen sharing on our platform, and I'll do like a live demo of the product itself. 1 second. Dashboard, Komodor, share. So can you see what I'm seeing? Like the Komodor platform?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. So this is the Komodor main screen. And here you have like Komodor on top of Komodor, basically eating our own dog food. And you can see here all of the services that are up and running in Komodor. And when I'm saying like service, what I really mean is a deployment, a stateful set, or a daemon set. And for each one of those services, we have like a tile, and we have the specific namespace or cluster. So this gives you like a high-level overview of your system. And because we play nicely with existing annotation and existing labels that you have, we can see the world like as Komodor see it or as our dev team see it. So I can see all of the pods that are using Postgres, or maybe I can go and see all of the front-end tools. So you have like the Slack, the web, the admin, and the GraphQL. We're a big believer in GraphQL. You can digest the world like by the language that the pod is currently running. And like I said, we use Python. We also use TypeScript. And basically, this is like the high-level overview of the system. Now let's go and do like I'll go to a specific like service that I have here open, and here you have everything that changed inside that specific service. And like I said, the service is basically a deployment in the last 24 hours. So all of these, like the green nice green things, are basically a deployment. A deployment means something that has changed inside your Kubernetes manifest. And when I click on a deployment, I can see like a deep dive on what really changed. So when I mean what really changed, then it means something very similar to that. So this is basically a diff, not a GitHub diff, but a YAML diff taken from inside Kubernetes to show you the actual diff inside your cluster. So I can go back in time and see what really changed inside my cluster. And I can go like to this deployment or this deployment, and you can see that we are releasing quite frequency, and to see everything that changed as part of the YAMLs. We also show you like changes that happen inside config map or something else that is not necessarily like Kubernetes specific.
Okay.
Here on the right side, you don't have only like the Kubernetes, because it's interesting, but it's not the only interesting thing that you have, but also all of the GitHub changes that happen. So basically, think about it like as a time machine, and you can see everything that changed as part of the bigger thing, meaning like the GitHub changes. So this is like the Komodor main screen. We really like this timeline. And let me show you how it looks like when things aren't as pretty. I have like some examples here. So let's look on the payment listener application. which is another service where we have like inside our cluster. And here you can say that you had a deployment, but sadly, sadly for us, we failed. And that is because there was an issue with downloading the manifest. Like the manifest for this image didn't really work. Afterward, there was a deployment that was successful, which is great. And I can see that the image changed from latest with a typo to latest, which is really great. And we fixed the issue. But after this thing, I can see here that like you have like this yellow thing, and it means that the service was unhealthy. I see that for 4 minutes the service was unhealthy. It didn't have all the minimum replicas. Someone tried to fix it, and then basically when I say fix it, it tried to deploy a newer version, and again it failed because there was a typo. And after more time, I can see everything went back to normal, and basically there was a version, and now the service is healthy, because I can see here it's healthy, and it has 2 out of 2 replicas. And so what Komodor does, basically this very, very neat timeline shows you everything that you need to know in a single place. And let me show you like another quick example, and then I'll take some questions maybe on the product. 1 second, I'll let processor. Okay, so here you have like a not so happy state of a service that was deployed, which is great. But afterward, there was a health change, meaning the service was unhealthy. There was a Sentry exception, which is always bad. Then there was a Datadog alert. And other than that, we also track like external services. So I can see that there was any issues with GitHub or Azure. So in order to fetch the data that you see here, like the Kubernetes diff, the GitHub diff, the Sentry exception, and the Datadog monitor, without using Komodor, basically what you need to do is to open like 5 different tabs and to keep track out of each of them. And while using Komodor, you have all of this context, all of the data that you really need, all lined up in one single place. I think I will show you like one last thing, and then like maybe I'll open it for a little more questions. So you have here like the single timeline, but I also have like other services that might be related to my use case. And I can go here and see like, let's see all of the Node.js application. And I can see that this is all of the Node application, and I can add them to my timeline. So I can see everything that changed, not only for my service, but for all of the application that might be related. And I can see the timeline, just it was just added, like Datadog app. And I can also add, maybe I'll find something interesting, the web API. And I can add basically all of the application that I want, and to see everything on one single timeline. And this comes to address the issue that happens, in once you have like, I don't know, like 6 developers, and you start having teams, and people don't really know what other people are deploying at the moment. So this comes to answer this question, mainly like what changed not only for my services, but on the neighborhood. This is like a very quick sneak peek of Komodor. And I will say that like our target audience, or the people who gain the most benefit out of Komodor, is basically people who are running Kubernetes. They are spending a lot of time troubleshooting, which is basically almost everyone who is using Kubernetes in production. And that they use like several tools. So once the team grow to a certain size, and it can be even like 5 or 10 developers, but usually around like 50 plus developers, it's super hard like figuring out what has changed and what's the current status of your cluster.
Yeah. And especially when you're talking about, even with just a small team of developers, when you start, when you're no longer the person that's the only one applying manifests to the cluster, certainly the complex, even if you're just maybe someone and you're managing, the app in a particular namespace, and maybe it's got 5 or 6 pods in that namespace. It's a small app. It's only maybe it's got a couple of services. But the minute you start adding other people and they start creating their own manifests, it suddenly gets tricky, because you don't necessarily have an easy way to get a sense whether, I mean, sure, we got Slack updates. Like you said, you can look at monitoring tools. You can do a bunch of kube control commands. But just having a single dashboard showing me a timeline of activity and then relating that and being able to, because you're usually, like you're saying, I usually care more about the pod. I care about the pod, the set of pods in that deployment, the services in front of it, the load balancers in front of that, like all those things, the ingress rules, that are coming in. Like that's usually a nice view like that. So I like the ability you can add and subtract those on those related services. So we've got some questions. One of them asked earlier, let me see if I can pull that one up, was around, what are the requirements in terms of Kubernetes? Does it work? Does it support K8s and not any customized versions such as OpenShift?
No, we do support like OpenShift. So OpenShift and K3s as well. I saw that also, I think, on the chat. So yeah, as long as like the basic REST, the basic APIs of Kubernetes works, then we work. How our product works, like the Kubernetes side, is we have a native application agent running on top of the cluster, and it sends us the changes that happen across the cluster. It has a very low CPU and memory requirement. Everything is written in Go, super effective, and most of the heavy lifting is done on the service side, and meaning the ability to take the Kubernetes data, which is super important, to correlate it with other Kubernetes data and with other data points such as like the Datadog, the Sentry, and even things like, by the way, like Slack messages, and the ability to be not only like one way. Our goal is to integrate and to index as much data as possible.
Nice. Not sure some of these questions are for you. I'm just going to ask them. Is there? Can you show the REST API tail in the dashboard?
Oh, this is a great question, and the reason that I'm saying it's a great question is not because it's currently possible in the product. It is something we're going to release in the upcoming weeks. So again, like we started, and like I said, I'm not really want to fight with the login tools. Like I use login tools, I like them, and we were quite sure like people will want to use their own login mechanism and not use Komodor for that. And we have links that you can add to Komodor to the relevant logs. But as more and more customers asked us they tell us, using Komodor now I know that the deployment has failed. Just show me the logs. I'm already in your platform. Just let me close in like the loop. So we are adding like a live tail of all the pods. And I think it will be specifically nice. And when you have a failed pod, like for like a loop crash back off, sorry,
right.
or things like that you have to read like the application logs in order to understand what just happened right now.
Right, and then so it would force you to go to a different tool. Yeah, that's really neat, and that doesn't require you to have a third-party monitoring logging tool. Rather, to pull those in, you're just going to have it there yourself. Yeah.
No need for Fluentd or like Bits or something like that. Again, they are nice.
Yeah,
nothing bad about them.
Yeah, they can store it, for a long period of time and stuff like that. I'm sure. Do you need to deploy your app via some automated pipeline, or how do you link it to a Git commit?
Great question. The linking to Git commit, it's one of the trickiest and most interesting thing that we are doing. So in order to do the matching, we need some types of hints from our users. A lot of the time, the Docker image itself already has the GitHub SHA for a lot of organization. So basically, we take the SHA from the image, and we also have like a GitHub application. We have all of the data, and we correlate things by ourselves. For other customers, they might already have like some sort of tags on top of the Kubernetes. The Kubernetes deployment YAML, and we integrate with the annotations that if they already exist, then it's great. If not, we ask our users to add certain annotations. And again, one of the coolest things that we have in Komodor, like once your organization grows a little bit, then a single deployment might be affected from more than one repo. Maybe you have one repo for the application, but you have a different repo for all of the Kubernetes YAML. And in this specific deployment, both of them just change. So Komodor know how to correlate not like a single image that change, but to show you everything that is changed across multiple repos.
All right. Up next, Maz has the question: how does Komodor handle multiple clusters? Is it possible to federate 2 or more?
Yeah, sure. So one of the nice things, because we are really strong on Kubernetes, and the only things you really care about is you installing us on your cluster, then we support like out of the box multiple clusters, and we know how to show you like all of your clusters. We also work, because again, the focus on Kubernetes, we're also multi-cloud. So we have like a customers using us in AWS, Azure, and Oracle Cloud. And like everything just work out of the box, because the heavy lifting is done on our backend. And the Kube API is very similar in all 3 cases. So you can install us on multiple clusters, and then you can see everything in one place. And for all of you who are using like multi-clusters or multi-cloud, it makes like troubleshooting a whole different ballgame. It's even harder like to understand what changed and in which cluster and in which cloud. So using Komodor really gives you a very easy answer for that.
Yeah. Next up, how to avoid a flood of events and alerts. Imagine a company with several clusters in different regions. We could have a lot of noise. How do we filter it?
Yeah, great question. So at the moment, what we do is we read like the relevant tags annotation, both from the alerts and from the clusters, and we try to have like the best way like to correlate between those alerts and the services. Our goal is when you go to a service, you don't see I had like 300 Datadog alerts. You will see only the relevant alerts for this service. And we do it with a little bit of like rule engine, and also reading like the tags and annotation. And for some customers, we ask them to help us help them. So basically to add like relevant tags or annotation, so we can do it even better. And we are working really hard on that part, specifically on what's the best way like of signal to noise. Which alert should they show you and which alert shouldn't they show you? It's a very interesting question. And like you said, we try to be opinionated, but not too opinionated, which
right.
it's not easy, like walking between the drops.
Right. It's hard to make it perfect for everyone. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely, in my world of ops, like alert fatigue is a huge factor. I'm always dealing with alert fatigue, notification fatigue. It's just, these things are crazy when you first turn them on. And there's always, on a new environment and a new application, there's always a lot of effort put into turning the things down usually. Especially with a lot of the monitoring tools out there, because they want to show you a bunch of stuff wrong. It's almost like the monitoring tools come out of the gate and they're like, I want to show you everything wrong so that you think I'm working. Because if they show everything fine, then you think, well, this monitoring tool isn't working. But if they show you all these wrong things, so then you have to like start saying, okay, that's not an issue, or whatever.
I can share with you like how does alert graph looks for like most organization as we see, and I also experience it. And usually like you have like no alerts or very low amount. Then you start adding alerts, or you install a new alert system. So there's a huge spike of alerts, and you have like hundreds of alerts each day. And then you understand like 100 or like from a certain point, the alerts are meaningless because no one really looks at them. And then you're like, I'm going to do housekeeping and I'm going to make sure the alert level is very low. So you do like a very thorough like cleanup of the alerts. Yeah. And after, I don't know, like a week or 2 weeks or even a month, then it's going to be back up. And I can tell you that some customers already asked Komodor like to help to reduce the noise, because we index everything. We index the alert, the pager duty. We index alerts from different systems and different monitoring tools. So we are looking in like helping reduce like alert fatigue. So it is something that we are working on. And we hope like to help organizations just understand what alerts doesn't really matter, or no one really looks at them and they are closing automatically. So yeah.
Right, or in bulk. Just close all, select all, close.
Yeah, but this,
yeah.
this is what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually seen cases where people install one monitoring tool. There's too much alerting. They're tired of trying to manage it. So then they install a second monitoring tool, leaving the first one there, but a second monitoring tool that they try to make alert less so that they can depend on that tool more than the first one. There's chaos out there. And so it's rare to see something out of the gate that gives me anything close to the right amount of alerting for a normal sized team. So yeah, it's tough. If only it was just a little drag, a little metric I can just drag left and right, and then when I get it,
like one of the things we try to do for our customers, and the moment it's more like of a personal approach, but we try to improve it, is like to showcase them like what's the best practices or what should you do just to understand what is happening. So let's say you're a Komodor user, we just install Komodor in your cluster, and then I show you that you have a lot of health events, meaning your service is unhealthy for, I don't know, like 10 seconds each 2 minutes or something like that. And you aren't really aware of it. And sometimes like our customers are saying to us, why is my service unhealthy? And sometimes they just don't configure the resource limit correctly or the health checks correctly. And there are so many little glitches that you must know in order to make sure like your system is running correctly. And we see so many people just running towards Kubernetes like it's a magical, pill for all of their illnesses. And
right.
Like Kubernetes it's not that easy. Like I really love Kubernetes. You can master it. I think it's a great technology. Like I really like Kubernetes, but it takes times, and we try to like highlight for our customers sometimes. You should look here, and here because you have a lot of alerts, and you don't have the right health mechanism or resource mechanism.
Yeah. All right. We got 3 or 4 more questions. I know we're hitting the top of the hour, so everyone need to get your questions in quick before we wrap up the show. But we'll see if we can do some rapid fire. One easy way to try. Basically, how do they sign up? They just go to the website.
So just go to the site and do like free trial, and we'll contact you very soon. At the moment, like we accept everyone, but we do a very quick like demo introduction with our customers. We plan on going like self-serve in a couple of months probably. But for now, we do like to speak with the customers. But we do give like a free trial, and feel free to check it out. You can also email me if you like on itiel at komodor.com.
Or reach you on Twitter, which we have our handles below us.
Or in Twitter. Yeah, I'm not really a Twitter. I'm not that strong on Twitter, but yeah, feel free. Like there are direct DM in Twitter, right?
Yeah. It'll send you an email, hopefully. So they sign up, and that's in the startup game we call that concierge service. So you're giving that very nice holding hand on new customers, and that's great because within the world of free signups, it's for everything. It's always that hard. Okay, I've signed up and now I have no idea what I need to do.
You have an empty screen. Like you finish the sign up, the screen is empty, and you're like, I don't really want an empty screen. I want a product to use, and making sure like the onboarding experience is good is something that we spend a lot of time. Like the basic installation take less than 5 minutes, and you already have Komodor monitoring your services.
Yeah. So a deep technical question basically is tell me, I guess, essentially talk more about the agent, or is this a controller? Is this an agent on every node? Is this just one?
No, like it's a single deployment. Like we thought about doing it daemon set, but for now, even for very big clusters, like dozens of different nodes, we don't really need it. Memory-wise, I can share like the Helm chart, but I think it's like under one health CPU and 500 RAM, I think, but like the actual number is super low. Like basically all it does, it listens to the Cube API. It does some basic reduction if the customers want, like if you have any kind of secret or like secret keys or something like that, we do reduction and we send everything to Komodor. So it's basic as possible, and like Go is really effective. We use the standard Cube API, the Cube, the caching mechanism. For those of you who really knows like the Cube API mechanism. So yeah.
All right. That's actually nice because I'm used to a world where I've got 3 or 4 monitoring agents as daemon sets on every single node, and another tool with another daemon set on every node.
We sometimes are installing in a company and we see all of their services, and you see so much like memory and resources are spent only on like 4 daemon set for a cluster that has 40 nodes. It's a lot of money you are paying just on the compute resources of those tools that monitoring your cluster.
Especially if they're deeper inspection, New Relic, stuff like that. Yeah, it can get really costly.
They are expensive.
Okay, so another question was, you showed Jenkins as a part of the example for CD. Are there other CD tools like Argo and Flux supported as well?
Well, we support Argo, and now we are also planning on supporting like Flux out of the box. Argo CD, by the way, again, for me one of the best like projects. I really like both like the community there and the tool itself. So yeah, we do support like Argo out of the box.
Yeah, we mentioned Argo a lot on this show, and actually had Victor, who you were on recently on Victor Farsik's show, DevOps Paradox. So for those of you on YouTube, go check out DevOps Paradox. And we had, I think he was on the show in the fall maybe of last year, in autumn, and we talked about Argo. He gave a little demo of Argo CD, and we talked about the project and like versus Flux, and and he lives in that world of CD tooling since he used to work at CloudBees, which makes Jenkins. So it was a really great conversation around, I just love all these new ideas around the GitOps tools and bringing change back to Git and using Git as the source of truth rather than having yet another dashboard and another tool just to, do that. But I could see how this layered on top of that gives me more than just, answering the question, what image am I running? Which is a valuable thing, but now if I can get that in Git, having a tool like this on top that timeline view is actually pretty great, because that's like when you're one of many operators, you can't. Most tools don't give you a timeline. They give you a timeline of monitoring, or you can see a list of log events, but understanding the change rate in the cluster and what's changed that you care about, what changes that you didn't. That's pretty great stuff. All right, I think we have maybe one more question. We deployed. Oh, okay. This was more color on the cost of the operators or the CPU agent, because they were saying that Manvidar was saying that they deployed Istio and the costs were over what our services were consuming, so it was not feasible for us to use. So the tools were using more CPU than your actual app, right?
Istio, at least I was using like a very, very, very version of Istio. Like I think like using Istio, you need to know what you are doing, and he was, I'm not sure how it's right now, but he had so much overhead, like latency, memory, CPU. Maybe now things are better, but I was using like 0.3, I think, or 0.5 or something like that, and it was like we had like 3 services, but Istio almost crashed our cluster, and then I deleted it. And I promised myself, if I'm going to use Istio again, I'm going to have a really, really good reason. And I still didn't. Didn't have one. Again, I think the project is nice. I don't want to say bad things because I didn't use it for 2 years, I think. But like Komodor isn't close to that.
I mean, and any of those service meshes it's one of those things where it's not for the faint of heart. You definitely want to be an expert at a lot of the levels of Kubernetes and servers and networking and proxies and TLS and certificates. Like there's so much you have to know before you even really want to step your toe in. So I'm actually need to do several shows to talk about some of these projects and their status and have some of the experts on. It's been I think almost a year since we've had a service mesh company, like, or a project manager for a service mesh, come on the show. And I think it's time for an update because I know that everybody's trying to make it easier, simpler, more reliable, like basically following the path of Kubernetes, but they're years behind. So
no, like
yeah.
every time a customers of mine ask me like what I think about service mesh, I just ask them like, what are you trying to achieve? And like 9 out of 10 customers don't really need service mesh. Sometimes you try to do like very complicated cross-cluster communication,
Right.
and to make sure but like most people, if you are in like Istio, Spinnaker, there are certain tools in our community that has a really good reputation. And for some people, they work great. Like I do know companies using Istio and are happy with that. But most of these companies have a whole team dedicated, like holding Istio hand and making sure everything works as expected.
Right. Well, and this has been a great little intro into the tool. I'm glad people are interested in asking more questions about it. So I think we're going to leave it at that. And is there anything else you wanted to mention? So we know about sign up. They're going to get some concierge service if they do that to help them onboard it and check it out. We got our Twitter handles below. You can find more resources on their website, obviously, for all their socials. What else?
Like nothing else. Use Komodor. Understand it will make your life troubleshooting Kubernetes a lot easier. A lot of big companies are already using us in production successfully. And yeah, no, I don't. We also have like nice blog posts, and we try to do like things to write interesting pieces and not like marketing things.
Right.
And we have a very nice one coming up. Nothing else.
Look at that,
I have
alert
to say.
fatigue,
Like,
my favorite topic.
No,
Yeah.
like there was a time that like I don't know, like all of our customers just complained so much about alert fatigue that I tried taking everything that I heard and write it down regarding how they manage it and so on.
Oh, okay, yeah, how they fixed that problem. Yeah, I'm gonna need to read that because I'm always struggling. Like it's never perfect. It's either too little, too much. It's not in the right tool. I don't see it. I'm tired of it emptying out my inbox. All that kind of stuff.
There's a nice blog post by Netflix, I think, about the mechanism they use in order to do better alerts, or Facebook. It was like in Hacker News recently, and you see how many like brilliant data scientists are there just to make sure the alert are like the alert to like noise to signal ratio is fine. And it's so hard. Like they have like the best PhDs in the world trying to solve like the alert fatigue issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
Don't be sad if you're experienced.
We're all struggling with it. So don't be sad. Well, thanks so much, Itiel, for being on the show. I'm looking forward to as the tool progresses, and we have you back on the show at some point for some big updates on what's new and all that. I'm already looking forward to that. So thanks again for taking your time. And we'll be back here next week. Actually, next week, those of you that are fans of watching YouTube videos, you probably know our next week guest. We're going to have Nana, Tech World by Nana, if you remember her, on YouTube. She has a great, very popular YouTube channel all about Docker. She just recently became a Docker captain. So I'm going to have her on the show next week, and we'll talk more about Docker, learning Kubernetes, learning all the container tools. So it's going to be a fun time. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for hanging out. Yeah, thanks for all the questions and the great answers, of course, Itiel. And we'll see you next week on YouTube Live. Ciao.